the big shaila, what's the function of the oila now that the oilam is extremely baki and well versed in the Yanam Kriya Satira, mistakes in the Kriya, the laning a lane, the etzim laning. So now we have to focus on the oila, on the Aliyah L'Torah. And there are many shailas. And like I keep on saying, a busy Monday and Thursday is not the time to try to come to the answers on these shailas. And what the oilam is learning is taka to try to when that situation arises, that we know what to do. Some of the situations, very sensitive situations, some more than others. From the fact that a person could get an aliyah, he could be offered an aliyah, this is his big chance. And here he is in the middle of Sukkot Zimra, and he doesn't want to explain to everybody why he was late. Can he take the aliyah? He gets an aliyah in the middle of Kriya Shema. Now what? And he's the only kohen. Now what? To a more sensitive type of a topic, what happens? He gets an aliyah, and le'aleinu rachmana litzlan, he's blind or he's deaf. Can he take the aliyah? Certainly, if he's blind, he won't be able to read mitach l'ksav. So can he take such an aliyah? What if it's nebuch, a meyuchadik child, a special child? Can he get an aliyah in a situation where he's not a shaita? Which there are many situations where the child, even though we call him a meyuchadik child, but they manage to teach him. And is he going to be allowed to get an aliyah? And somehow these shilas might all be related. Interestingly enough, a shilah which seems not to be so related, a fellow forgot his glasses at home, and it's hard for him to see. Could he get an aliyah? He knows the brachas by heart, so what could be the issue? So this Rabbi Yisai will try today to first try to come to an understanding in what exactly is the function of the oila. Once we come to the understanding of what the function of the Aliyah L'Torah is, most of these shilas will fall into place. The chayra, is he being moitzi us? It would seem to be, and that would be the pashtus, that obviously if we're bringing somebody else up there other than the Bal Kairei, it would seem to be that obviously he's trying to be moitzi us. And what is he being moitzi us in? Because it seems to be that we already have somebody laning. So why can't the person that's laning be moitzias? We all want to be yotzei Ezra's takana of laning. So why wasn't it enough just to have the Bal Kairei? So what would seem to be, and as we go through the Shia Mitashem, we'll build it a bit more and more. It would seem to be that he's clearly making the bracha for us. Okay, so I could be yotzei with his bracha, but it seems to be that there's much more. It seems to be that the Aliyah L'Torah is he's the one that is in essence doing the laning for us. It seems to be he's being moitzi us in the laning, and actually that would make sense why he's actually making a bracha, because he's the one that is our makri of the Megillah, of the Chumash, in this case of the Torah Kedosha. And it would seem to be that the birchas Torah is making is on the laning, and in essence the Bal Kairei is somewhat of a shliach, like a shliach tzibur azar. But it would seem to be, which is the most important, is that if he's making a bracha on the aliyah, and that is the function of the oila, then he's actually laning for us. And if he would actually be laning for us, then many of our shilas today are going to come out with these sensitive shilas conclusively to be a very difficult conclusion. For example, lefi this, if I get an aliyah during Kriya Shema, I can't start laning in the middle of Kriya Shema. In other words, if you learn like this, then the Oila L'Torah is making a bracha on the laning that he's laning for all of us. So then it's not enough just that the Bal Kairei should lane. It would seem to be that the one that gets the aliyah, he also has to be laning. And adarabah, that's what his bracha is. He's making a bracha on the laning that he's giving for us. If that's the case, avada, he has to lane along. Lefi this, you get a bracha maybe even during Kriya Shema. Maybe, even during Pesukah Zimra. How are you going to lane along? You're in the middle of Pesukah Zimra. You're not allowed to talk during Pesukah Zimra. And you go to the case of the blind person, it would come out, lefi this, that Avadi can't get the aliyah. And it would come out that a person who's an Amaretz, Amoldik and Amaratzim, or Chilaini, and he doesn't know how to lane Bichlal. So, they managed to transliterate for him maybe the brachas or something. But he obviously wouldn't lefi this Amalek be able to get an aliyah. He's making brachas on what? On the laning, but he's not laning. And obviously, it's not enough what the Balkaira is doing, because we do bring up there somebody to make brachas, the Oila Torah. So it must be that the Oila Torah is actually leaning for us. And that somehow is how we're being yotzei at the Kon of Ezra. We send up the shliach, he makes the brachas, he lanes along. We obviously are yotzei with the Balkaira, but we have to be a part of it. He's the one that connects us to it. So lefi this, a blind person, a chilayni that doesn't know how to read, and you know what, Rabbi Yisai would come out lefi this, the bar mitzvah bacher, who they taught him how to just read the brachas, and then he's looking around over there, and he's checking out his new tie, and he's thinking about the kiddush, and he's thinking about his friends and how hard they're going to throw at him. But he's not laning. And lefi this, Rabbi Yisai, it would come out l'chayra that it would be a bracha levatala. It would also come out that if you don't know how to read along for whatever reason, you shouldn't take an aliyah. And it's interesting, the Torah brings down, and I mentioned this once, that Rebbe Kiva once declined an aliyah because he wasn't prepared for the laning. In those days, Taka, the Balkaire read it out loud, the Oila Torah read it out loud, and he actually declined an aliyah. There's a klala to decline an aliyah. Of course, there's no klala in a situation when you have a good reason, like you don't know how to read. So there would be a very good reason to decline the aliyah. So this is the reason why Rabbi Yisai, the Beis Yosef, brings it Abu Draham, that if a person is called up for an aliyah and he can't lane along, so then he can't go up for the aliyah. And the Abu Draham says, Sarach limchais, you have to be moicha biyodai, and he's making a bracha levatala, because the God's objective of the Oila Torah is that he's doing our job. He is our shliach of the tzibur to go and lane from the Torah. We send him up. He makes the bracha on the laning, and he has to lane for us. Obviously, he shouldn't lane loud enough that it bothers the Balkaire, but he's the one that's going up and laning on our behalf. And this is the reason why that Abu Draham very emphatically says that if a person is going to get an aliyah and he's not going to read along, so then it's a bracha levatala. And you have to be moicha, and you can't say amen. And Rav Saadia Gaon says, even if he's the only kohen in the shul, if he can't lane, it's a bracha levatala. The Rosh in Megillah, in Gimel Aleph, Perek Gimel, Halacha Aleph, the Rosh brings down, if he's not laning along, even if he knows how to lane, there's no kol aroi labila over here, Rabbi Yisai. If he's not laning along, so then the Rosh says, it's a bracha levatala, and don't give him an aliyah. And this is the reason why the Rosh says an Amoritz shouldn't get an aliyah. The Amoritz he was talking about was somebody that didn't know how to read along, and he certainly wasn't reading along. They somehow managed to give him the ability to say the brachas, but the Iker is not the brachas. The Iker is making the bracha on the laning that the Oila Torah is going to do for us as our shliach. And the Rivash in Aleph Dalid, he says you can't give an aliyah to someone that won't lane along. No, what's the pshat? There's a Balkaire. Yeah, for sure, right? Doesn't matter there's a Balkaire. It's still a bracha levatala. The bracha that you're making is on the aliyah, is on the laning. The Rashbash in Tavkav Ches, he says, if he can't lane along, who's he being mitzi? Harei Rabbi Yisai, what's the difference between him and us? If he's just listening to the Balkaire, we're also just listening to the Balkaire. There has to be some kind of a difference between us and him. Never wondered that, Rabbi Yisai. We're also all there listening to the Balkaire. So how could there be that the Oila Torah goes up there, he makes a bracha, and he's just listening along? So says the Rashbash, it can't be that if he's not being, he has to be moitzios. And if he's not being yotzei, then we're not being yotzei. And therefore, you can't even say amen to his bracha, he writes over there. And this, Rabbi Yisai, shockingly, is the psak of the Heilige Shulchan Aruch in mamish 4 places, and I'll read it to you. The Shulchan Aruch over here in Siman Kuf Lamed Hey Sif Dalet, and this is clearly the psak of the Sfardim, which we'll see in a moment. Haminig apashit afilu kayim amaretz kaydim likreis. Even if he's an amaretz, you give an aliyah to a kayim, and he comes before a gadol b'Yisrael. But who shall kayim yodei likreis? Says the Shulchan Aruch emphatically, it has to be that the kayim knows how to lane. In Yuchel Likreis, Mashiach Mila B'Mila, that's enough. But he has to lane along. Shim'ena Yadeya Likreis, Heyach Yavarech Ala Torah. That's a Shulchan Aruch in Kuf Lamed Hey, Steve Dalit, in Kuf Lamed Tes, Steve Beis. He says again, Mishein Yadeya Likreis. If he doesn't know how to lane along and he's getting an aliyah, Tzarech Limchais B'Yadei Shalayala L'Sefer Torah. You have to not allow him to get an aliyah in Tzrichim L'Zeh, Shein Yadeya Likreis. If he should call in a Levi, So the only way it works is if he reads Mila b'Mila. Vim lav lo yala. Lo yala, says the Shulchan Aruch. In Kuf Lamed Tes Sif Gimel, that was Sif Beis. In Sif Gimel, Shulchan Aruch says again, Suma ain't a koire. A very sensitive shaila, a blind person, he can't lane. He can't get an aliyah, excuse me. Also the great afilu ois echad shaloim and aksav. Shulchan Aruch in Siman Kuf Mem Aleph, Sif Beis, again, 4 places. The Shulchan Aruch repeats this over and over. I don't know any other halacha that the Shulchan Aruch repeats 4 times in Hilchos Kriyas HaTorah. That's for sure not. In the base, it says, La yikru shnayim, ela the oila is koire, v'shliach tzibur is shoisik. Oy shliach tzibur is koire, and the oila la yikru b'kol ram. One of them has to read, mikol makam, sarchu likroisim shliach tzibur. Avada, even if the shliach tzibur is reading for you, you have to read along. Kedei shalo yehei bracha levatala. Ella, that they shouldn't hear your voice and that you shouldn't bother other people. So this is clearly the psak of the Shulchan Aruch, that you have to lane along. Now the obvious kasha is what happened to Shemei Ka'ina? Everybody here knows there's a concept of Shemei Ka'ina. And what happened to Shemei Ka'ina? Why can't the Oila L'Torah be Yotzei with Shemei Ka'ina? It's a concept in Gan Skol Torah Kula. And the truth is that this seems to be the taina of the Taz. And really the Maril, and this Maril is brought by the Ramah in Siman Kuf Lamed Tes Sif Gimel. The Maril going on that line, what we just read about Asuma, that Asuma is not allowed to get an aliyah because Asuma can't read along. Says the Maril Kosav. Now something is very mysterious over here in the Ramah. Usually the Ramah writes Hego. Over here in Kuf Lamed Tes Sif Gimel, it doesn't say Hego, and it goes straight to the point. Umaril Kosav Akshav Koyret Suma. Today, by us, a blind person reads. Kimoi. And what's his example? Tali Tanya b'Delay Tanya. Kimoi, that we allow an Amaritz to read. All the things that the Shulchan Aruch said you can't do, the Maril says you could do. He says an Amaritz that doesn't know how to lane along, he can get an aliyah, even though he's not going to lane along. A blind person that certainly can't lane along, he can get an aliyah. And this is what the Taz in Kuf Mem Aleph Sif Gimel, he says, and what happened to Shemei Ka'ina? Why can't somebody else lane for me? That you understand that the Bal Koire is allowed to lane for me. So then why don't you understand that the person that's getting an aliyah, he also, the Bal Koire will lane for him, and he's going to be Moitzi Yos with Shemei Ka'ina. And this is Lavush and the Bach and the Masas Binyamin, Sim Samach Dalid, and they bring down that the minig is not like the Shulchan Aruch, and that's what it says in the Zohar even, which we'll see in a moment. What's the talk of the Pshat? What's the Pshat in the Rashbach, in the Rivosh, in the Rasag, in the Rosh, in the Abu Jaham, and all of them, the Shulchan Aruch? What happened to Shemei Ka'ina? So here, the Maisa, Chaya, you have to understand, Rabbi Isai, right? What is the difference between us and the Oila? We're also just listening, right? It seems to be that if he's making 2 brachas, he can't be making just 2 brachas, says the Sheilas Yaivitz in Siman Ayin Hey. He can't be making 2 brachas on listening. Then we would all make 2 brachas. Elamai, those 2 brachas are what? If he's doing the same thing as us, that he's just listening, so then what? He's making just the bracha on the listening. L'chayra, this could be, as you all imagine, totally in the regular old chakira of Shemei Ka'ina. You look at the Chuvas B'Samim Reish and Reish Sadi Aleph, which some say actually is the Rosh, and that which did very good over here. And he explains that if he can't lane, then certainly you can't give him an aliyah. He says, why? He says, because everybody's listening. Rather, this person goes up and he's considered the tzibur. He's laning for the tzibur. So he says, Shemei Ka'ina, and he explains it came out like this. Shemei Ka'ina means that there's 2 methodologies of being yotzei mitzvah. There's one way by saying, and there's one way by hearing. So you make Kiddush on Friday night, either you make Kiddush or listening to Kiddush, that also you're yotzei with listening to Kiddush. So says the Besamim Reish, when something requires listening, so then you can be yotzei. And you don't have to actually say. Dainu, there's 2 different ways to be yotzei the mitzvah, listening or hearing. I could choose this methodology, I could choose that methodology. But says the Besamim Reish, over here, it's not going to work because here you're listening anyways. So what's the function of the oila? The function of the oila is because you, the tzibur, need to read. So then if the oila is our shaliach, we need that the oila has to go up and that the oila has to actually read for us. He's the one that's going up and reading on our behalf. If he has to read on our behalf, it's not going to help that he's hearing. Now the Har Tzvi in Nun Zayin, Hitaka says, it's totally in that famous Chakira, right? And he says that if I'm Yotzei with listening, so then why not? If the way that Shemei Ka'ina works is just through listening. But he says, look, the way it works by Kiddush, some learn Al Kapanim the Lamdas of Shemei Ka'ina, is that whatever he has, I have. So whatever he has, I have. So if you learn like that, so then the Oila can go up there and he makes the brachas and he listens. And with that listening, that's the connection to the Baal Koirei. And Ayadei, the Shmiya is like what creates the Shlichus. Not that you're Yotzei with the Shmiya. The Shmiya creates the Shlichus. And once I'm Shemeya, the Oila, I connect myself to the Baal Koirei, and whatever he has, I have. And then that's, of course, he's on our behalf. So this Rabbi Yisai is a Grace of Shaila and a Grace of Machlekes. And when the dust settles, it does seem to be it would be Tali. And the Taz seems to learn that it is going to work enough Shemei Ka'ina, because Shemei has Kekoirei, and whatever he has, I have. But the Rishonim say that listening is nice, because Shemei Ka'ina is just listening. Listening is nice, but it's not called your reading. This you could be mefalfel on. I'm sure mefalfel on a lot more. But we have a big agenda, Rabbi Yisai. But halacha l'maisa, it does seem to be that this is a tremendous machlekes. The Sfardim seem to have no shaila, and by them, if you're not leaning along, it's a bracha levatala. The Ashkenazim, the Ramah brings down, like I mentioned, in Kuf Lamed Hey Sif Daled, the Darkei Moshe brings down the Maril that allow the Kohen Amaretz to get an Aliyah, and also a blind person to get an Aliyah, because Vaistais, you don't have to actually lane along. Vaistais, it's enough that you don't have to lane along. Now, the problem with this, Rabbi Yisai, is if you look over here, it's a little bit complicated. In the Ramah over here, in Sif Gimel, Kuf Lamed Tes Sif Gimel, he brings down the Maril that says, Achshav Koirei Suma, K'moshe Anu Makrim, B'Torah L'Amaretz. He seems to be chaylik on the Shulchan Aruch. And that he seems to say it's enough that he's reading along. Excuse me, he doesn't have to read along. And it's enough that he makes the brachas, that's enough. Over by, in Kuf Lamed Hey Sif Daled, the Ramah brings down, over there, the Ramah brings the Abu Draham. The Abu Draham was the one that said that if he's not going to lane along every word, he's not going to be Yotzei. And the Darkei Moshe, in Kuf Lamed Hey Sif Daled, when he quotes the Maril, he says, Loi nira kemaril. So something here is very, very strange. The Ramah himself in Kuf Lamed Tes seems to bring the Ramah, the Maril, that you are Yotzei. Suma could get an Aliyah, just like a Kohen Amaretz can get an Aliyah. In Kuf Lamed Hey, he seems to say, not like that he can't get an Aliyah because he's not going to lane along, or because he can't lane along. And then Darkei Moshe explicitly says, Deloika Maril, because he's not going to lane along, so therefore we don't give him an Aliyah. So what is the psak of the Heilig Ramah? So the Shartzian in Sivkot and Vav asked this question in Kuf Lamed Tes Sivkot and Vav. And he says, Din Zeshel Maril, the Darkei Moshe already said, Loi nir Loi. Bain by Suma, it's all the same din. Bain by a Suma, Bain by an Amaretz, somebody who's not going to lane along. Ella, but because the minig oilam is to be mekel, therefore the Ramah was very makbid on minig Yisrael, wanted to bring this in the Sefer Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, that you should know the minig is to be mekel. He himself doesn't hold like this. Then he writes, V'lechem Parshas Para, which is deraisa, ubefrat zacher, v'lekuli alma deraisa, nachen li zayir b'zeh. Definitely be careful and don't be oila, a person that's blind, a person that's not going to lane along. Even if you paid a lot of money for Zachar, but you want to be Yotzei, right? That doesn't read along, it's not the Chatchila. And the Begabi these parshas, Bevadai Nakan Lahachmir. Bevadai Nakan Lahachmir. It's a good question. Where does the Mishnah Berurah in Hilchos Kriyas HaTorah talk about Parshas Zachar? We know there's a whole simon about Parshas Zachar and Tafresh Behei, but over here he mentions it in the Shartzian. Sakapanim, it's not so very encouraging. The way the Shartzian is learning is that the Ramah Be'emes holds, if you ask me, you're not Yotzei. But the Maril said that was the minig, and the Ramah wants to tell you that that's the minig. So if you this, it would sound like even the Ramah would hold that this is absolutely not, I guess, acceptable behavior, just, Godel minig. It's interesting that my Mordechai in Kuf Lamed Tes has a different shot. He says these words are not the words of the Ramah. And it's talking a little bit Meduyak over here. It doesn't say the word Hagah. He says these words came from the Ber Goyla. And Taka, in the Shulchan Aruchs over there, I have over there, the Friedman Shulchan Aruchs, they bring down the Taka, this was a Girsa in the Ber Goyla. And with that, it would come out that Taka the Ramah would paskin not like the Mariel, and that he paskin like the Shulchan Aruch, and that Avadi you have to be able to lane along, and if you don't lane along, and if you're not laning along, not just you have to be able to, you have to actually, right? What did the Brisker Rav say? They asked him, is the Bocha as our Lamdin? So the Brisker Rav, Bamich, Lamdin is there was learned. Not the Lamdin is somebody that learns. He's a Lamdan, he learns, right? So it's not enough that you know how to lane, daf laning. You have to be somebody that's linked. You have to lane. And if you don't lane along, it sounds like not just the Shulchan Aruch, but even the Ramah Be'emes holds like that you're not Yotzei. Deloika Maimer Mordechai. That's what it sounds like. Excuse me, Levida Maimer Mordechai. And even according to the Shaburu's Pshat, that this is the Ramah Be'emes holds you're not Taka Yotzei, but the minig is that you are Yotzei. So Lamaisa, you got to be very careful with this Shad Rabbi Say. And the Beis Yosef brings after all this, he says that there is a Zohar that seems to say not so. And the Zohar seems to learn that Kemai Kriyas HaTorah was a Zayvi Mamish like Matan Torah, and it has to be said Mamish in silence like it was given from the Sinai itself. And therefore he says, therefore it's unthinkable to speak. And obviously you have to tell this to people, it's unthinkable to speak. But the Beis Yosef says, so then according to the Zohar, how does it work? I guess it works. Shemei Kohenos is the Beis Yosef. But then he goes on to say that now, even according to the Zohar, right, you should read along quietly, just not being mashmiel la'oznai. And this taka is what it says over here in Simkuf Mem Aleph, which I mentioned a moment ago. I'll read it again now. You have a new appreciation. The Shulchan Aruch brings down that he has to read along, and the Shulchan Aruch says that if not, it'll be a bracha batala. But sarach likros benachas shleish mil oznai. You don't read it loud enough. Sometimes the person who gets the aliyah, he thinks he's the chazan for bells during Ne'ilah b'Shas Yom Kippur, right? So that's not how it's supposed to be. Sarach likros benachas shleish mil oznai. You're supposed to read it very quietly, and you shouldn't even hear it to your ears. Certainly not to other people's. Of them, Zok the Ramah, not like that. Ramah says, "Afilu mashmiya la'oznav leika lemechash to le'adav mitfila." The Shulchan Aruch says, no, you're allowed to read it at a volume that taka is mashmiel oznai. And the Mishnah Berurah is quick to point out that it doesn't have to be loud, right? But it's not a problem if you're being mashmiat le'oznai. So now, when we go back to our shilas, we understand that a person that's blind, it's a very sensitive shaila. And you know, what should I say? Gadol minig, in a case where the sensitivity is of such a nature, agam, that the Shulchan Aruch and maybe the Pashtas Ramah is the paskin that he shouldn't get an aliyah. But Gadol minig, and the Mariel already tells us that the minig is that the people that were blind got aliyahs. So l'chayra, b'makim, as I covered abrius, a blind person, he's already chashiv kameis. You have to make him feel worse. So b'kai gavna, Gadol minig, and you can give him an aliyah. Agav, when a blind person gets an aliyah, the stomach should be told taka to not read along, even if he knows the laning balpeh, because here he should taka be yoyte with shemei kaina, and he shouldn't lane along, and he should be listening, and that's the stomach. You should know. I looked around, and the Kaf HaChaim says that even for the Sfardim, which is a big chiddush, that they're going to be makel for a blind person because of the sensitivity factor. I guess it means that they'll be saimich on the zoyer, that the pashtus zoyer is that when a person lanes, when a person gets an aliyah, he should just listen. The oila l'Torah should just listen, and he shouldn't speak out at all. If a person, however, asks me that deaf, I'm going to get to in a moment. Deaf is a prima godam. If a person will ask me, I forgot my glasses at home and I can't see. No. So now we should go back to the pashtus hasugya. He's not blind, Baruch Hashem. He has glasses. I also have glasses. Without my glasses, I can't see. Definitely, I can't see the aliyah l'Torah. So definitely, he should not get an aliyah. He shouldn't get an aliyah. And taka, that's ma'aseh shai. I mean, I'm not a rav, but it's a ma'aseh rav. That I grad. I guess I am a rav. I'm the rav in the shul. And taka, about a year and a half ago, my glasses broke, and I think we learned the sugya klapi poina, and they were broken in a way where I was chayshish that would be a problem of fixing, and therefore it was a muksa shaila. If you remember, we spoke about it. And when I came to shul, I taka can't see without my glasses, and to go and lean that close, I knew it was going to look very, very different and very strange. And not only that, I was also afraid it would bother the balkoire. I was also afraid that maybe some roik would come out of my mouth if I'd be that close to the letters, and that it could maybe chalila be moichik a sefer Torah, which chutz from Hilchos Shabbos could be just a churban if you moichik something. So I told the Gabbai when I walked in, please don't give me an Aliyah because I can't read along. And that's the Aleph basis, that if you're the one getting the Aliyah, you must read along. And Rabbi said, Bar Mitzvah Bachrim should be taught this. A Bar Mitzvah boy that's not taught this, he grows up to be an adult that says, what? I never heard this, that you have to read along. He thinks the whole function is this is his chance to just get the Aliyah and look in the sky. Now, if he gets an Aliyah and he's in space somewhere, so then you don't even have the Mekilim, because then he doesn't even have Shemei Kayine, spacing out. But even if he's not spacing out and he's listening to every word, but Avada Lechatchila, we're machmer like the Shulchan Aruch and the Pashtus maybe of the Ramah, that he has to, and that's a very good question, that he has to lean along. Rabbi Leibovitz is asking a question over here. How do we give Ketanim on Simchas Torah? So this is like the Pri Megadim says, in I think Tafresh Samech Zayin, the old side, Tafresh Samech Ches, the other side that Tafresh Samech Tes, sorry, that the other side that Simchas Torah, we do a lot of things for Kavod Torah that break the rules, and Avadas is a good example. The child is getting an Aliyah because she gets out the words, and because Ivada is not leaning along, and obviously it's all for Kavod Torah. We do things which break the rules, and this is one of the big chedushim in Simchas Torah. But that's what you have to say. Now, the Maisa, what happens if they call you up taka during Kriya Shema? So now the Magen Avraham comes along in Siman Samach Vav, which is not in Hilchos Kriya Torah, it's in Hilchos Kriya Shema, and he says if they call you up during Kriya Shema, so he says, don't go up. He says it's better not to go up if they called you up, right? He says you have no choice. If they're about to call you up and they say, Yamoid, you can tell them, no. And that's not called refusing an Aliyah, because you're refusing for a good reason. You're not going to be able to read along. But says the Magen Avraham, L'maisa, if they called out your name and you have to go up because they called you up, so Magen Avraham says, be soymech on the Zoyer. Now, until today, we were not mekubalim. Until today, we weren't mekubalim and we didn't know the Zoyer. But now we're mekubalim and we know the Zoyer. And the Zoyer is this Zoyer, which says that you're listening Shemek Ha'ina, like it was given at Sinai, and to be shoisik and to not say a word. The like how the Beis Yosef learned that it just means not to be a higher volume, and you'll be saimich on the Zayir if they call you up during Kriya Shema, and you get the Aliyah, and you won't read along. You'll just say the brachas. However, if it's during Pesukah de Zimra, it's a little bit more kludik speaking. You're allowed to shalom, shalom, etc. So therefore, b'kai govna. Gets called up during Pesukah de Zimra, we're even going to let him lane along, because there the hefsek is less, and the loss of not laning along is so incredible that we'll say, no, it's more important to us that you should lane along. What if you have a special child, like I spoke about before? So, there are a lot of special children that are able to be included in a minyan. I once had a boy who was, by me, a suffix, if you can include him in a minyan. He was a Miyuchadik boy, used to be the Gabbai in a shul, not where I was, this is before I was a Rav, in a shul when I lived in Mattersdorf, and he was mamish, he knew every shelf and every this. One time I did the terrible crime of putting a sefer back on shelf 723 and not 728, because the 3 and the 8 looked alike, and he came over me and bopped me on the head and said, what's wrong with you? This is 723. So I said to him, he holds this bracha. I say, let me take him to Rav Sheinberg Zichron Levracha, and let's see, maybe we can include him in a minyan, which a lot of times it's very negeya. So I took him to Rav Sheinberg. Rav Sheinberg just talked to him for a little bit and got the picture and whatnot. And Rav Sheinberg paskin that taka, you can include him in a minyan. He's mitzaref to a minyan. He had enough das that Rav Sheinberg held that he was able to be mitzaref to a minyan. It's great. As we were walking out, so I said, no, a bracha from the Rashiva, a bracha from the Rashiva. So this bacher, this 21-year-old special child, took his hand, put both his hands on the gadol door with all those tzitzis and gave him a bracha. Now Sheinberg said to me, Reb Shraga, what's your problem? You're asking if he needs a mitzaref to him, and he gives brachas to Gedolei Yisrael. So Mamela, you have this boy, and he's able to be mitzaref to a minyan, and he's able to get an aliyah, but he's not going to lane along. That's not the Metzias. And not only that, I think he's also going to space out. So that's a very big shaila, and it becomes a very sensitive shaila. And with a heavy hand, maybe covered up brias, maybe like the Olam was suggesting, maybe to give him achron, and that way at least we're yotzei the sheva kruim. And there are those that say this is the reason why there was a minig to make Haisafis, because at least we know that if there's Haisafis, we'll have 7 people that knew this halacha and laying the log. The Shabura brings down that if there's a kohen and he's the only kohen during Pesukah de Zimra, he says you can lechatchila call him up. And I think even a Svardi could probably be makel on this. But Kriya Shema is worse. In Kriya Shema, he should try to avoid the situation because he's not going to be able to lay along. A cherish, the Olam was asking before, there's a prima godim in Kuf Memalasi base. Lefi what you heard today, the cherish, there's no problem. What could be the problem with the cherish? The cherish will lay along. What should be the problem? He'll get the aliyah, he'll make the bracha, he'll lay along. The fact that he can't hear, adarabba, we don't need shemek kaina. And that's exactly what the prima godim says. He says he'll lay along. Now, the one thing you do see from over here is very interesting, is that from here is a raya to something. Sometimes I have the problem that the balkoire, I'm going to talk in a moment about an Elaine. Sometimes I have the problem that the balkoire is faster than me. And especially in Eretz Yisrael. The Eretz Yisrael take a balkoire is fragnished. Right? So, Lamaisa, sometimes you have the problem, he's faster than you. So, sometimes it takes me an extra, 5 seconds to finish the aliyah. The fee, what you heard now, it's okay. I don't have to be laning exactly at the same exact time as the balkoire. How do I know that? Because the cherish for sure can't be laning at the exact same time as the balkoire. How in the world can the cherish know where the balkoire is up to? And Afal Pikein, you see from the Prima Kodim that it works. And that's what I'm saying. And sometimes I finish a few seconds afterward. And that's okay. I'm doing my job and he's doing his job. L'chayra. An Elaim, l'chayra, is a problem. There is Agav, you're wondering, what's the case of an Elaim? He's not going to be able to make the bracha. So what's the case of an Elaim? So in Yerdeya, in Siman Aleph, in Siv Zayin over there's a Prima Godim that talks about if the shoichet is an Elaim. So they talk about the case over there that someone else will make the bracha for the shoichet, and he'll be yoitze with shemea ka'oina, and he discusses that should work. And he has a discussion, the Prima Godim, that maybe we could say the same exact thing about an Elaim, that someone, imagine this, there's a balkoire, there's a oila, Elaim, he can't talk, and then we'll bring up another guy who'll be moitzi the Elaim in the brachas of Shemea Ka'ina for us to be yoitze with the oila. So the Prima Godim dons this, and he says, maybe for a gadol ador, and it's a busha, sometimes Nebuch, he had a stroke, and it's a gadol ador, and it's covered abrius, there's a makim to be mekel. The Shevet Levi, in Chelik Zayin Siman Chaf, he says this is very different. How could you compare it to the case of the Shaykh? There, at least he's doing the Shechita. Mashengen over here, what is the person who's the Elam doing any different than everybody in the Tzibur? So how exactly does that work? And therefore, he's not so happy about this. Ramosha, in Chelik Beis, in Siman Aleph, dons the Shaila about a non-religious Jew. And he dons, first of all, about a reform rabbi. And you have to know that in Ramosha Zechron of the Vracha, Rabbanim, he called Rabbanim. The bad guys, he called rabbis. And he was talking, a reform rabbi, Ramosha says, Chalila not to give her a bracha. Oops. Him a bracha, it a bracha, whatever you call it today. I don't know what it identifies itself as. But Chalila not to give that person a bracha, because you can't even say amen to their bracha. Their bracha is not a bracha. Aim ze elam enayitz. So that's no discussion. A person like that, you can't give a bracha to because he's a Rasha Marusha. You can't say amen. He doesn't believe in our Halakha Torah. The question becomes a Dina Chinishbar, somebody who's a good person, he just doesn't know better, etc. So there we have the problem that he's not going to lay along. And this is a very big problem. It's obviously better to give him Hagba or to give him Psicha. Tell him Hagba, you get Tzchar Keneged Kula. Shalom Zalman says if he's a Rasha, don't give him an Aliyah, let him know. Adarabba, we want him to know we don't hold of him. But the Maisa, sometimes Nebuch, you have a fellow, he comes in for a yard site, doesn't know any better, not a bad person, he's not an apikoros. So we'll be saying on the minig of the Mariel. Certainly not Ashkenazi will be Samech on the Minhag of the Mariel, even though he's not going to lane along, but we'll be Samech on the Minhag of the Mariel. The Maisa, that's part one, the Etzim Surah of the Oila, that he has to actually be laning along, and that he's our shliach to be laning along, and he's doing our job. Now, let's go a little bit through the Pratei Halacha of an Oila and try to do it right, Bez Hashem, because like the Kaf HaChaim brings down, I think the Kaf HaChaim Taka is not in our Siman, I think the Kaf HaChaim is in Siman Nun Gimel. Over there it talks about that the Shatz has to be Hagen. The Shliach Tzibur has to be somebody who's worthy and roy. And the Kaf HaChaim says, what's the most roy? Is that he should know the halachas. And that he shouldn't make mistakes. So for example, the Ramban says that the Baruch Hu, Baruch is Hashem Baruch. What's the tachlis of the Baruch Hu? He says it's like a mezumin, telling everybody, I don't want to say telling everybody stop talking, because Chalila, they're not talking, but it's waking everybody up. We're starting over now. So the Radbaz says, it's everybody has to listen. And it's very interesting. It comes out that we're being ma'agid ourselves together through the Baruch Hu, which comes out that the Baruch Hashem and Baruch, I don't know how many Oilim know this. When he says Baruch Hashem and Baruch Loilam Vad, he's supposed to be saying it at the same time as the Tzibur. At least, while the Tzibur is in the middle of saying it, if he wants to stretch it out a little bit, but he can't be saying it by himself. By Davish, you could do, but you could dine by Kadusha that maybe has a din of the whole entire Tzibur, but certainly here, the Baruch Hashem and Vayrach is supposed to be being ma'agid together. Now, Maimar Muzgar, I forgot to mention this. You should know, when I mentioned before about reading along with the Baal Kairei, you should know that the Shulchan Aruch Shita is you're allowed to do Shtayim Mikra, and Simon Reish B'Yei, the Shulchan Aruch brings down that you're allowed to do Shtayim Mikra at the same time with the Baal Kairei. In other words, I'm talking now about us, the Tzibur that are listening to the Aliyah to the Kriyas HaTorah. You're allowed to be Yotzei Kriyas HaTorah by reading along. Till now, we were discussing that the Baal Koirei must read along, that the Oila Torah must read along. What's the din of us, the tzibur that's listening? Do we have to listen, Shemei Ka'ina, or should we read along? So you should know that the sheet of the Shulchan Aruch is you're allowed to read along, and you could even be Yotzei Shdayim Mikra. The Magen Avraham and Simon Kuf Mem Vav and Sivkot and Tes Vav says not like that. The Shabura brings down two shitas, and I guess if a person will concentrate better, or maybe if he knows he won't get Shtayim Mikra done otherwise, so then he can even read along at the time of the Aliyah. Now, Lemaisa, as you all know, we make a bracha before and a bracha afterward, because it's the end of the mitzvah. Now, it's very interesting. This is something that you could be marich on, but the time doesn't allow us to. The Mishnah Megillah and Daf Chaf Aleph seems to say that originally the mitzias was, there was one bracha before the laning and one bracha after the laning. Not like we have it, bracha, bracha, bracha. And it seems to be in those days, they would call up somebody to be oil Torah, and his job was not even to make brachas. He would be yamoid, and he would just get the aliyah, and he would lane for us. Either kipshuta, he would lane out loud for us, like was the minig back then, or he would stand next to the Baal Kairei and lane together for us without brachas. What happened, says the Gemara, the latecomers and the people that left early, so they didn't know that there was a bracha at the end. Peladik Maisa, Ramesha already points this out in the Tshuva. He says, here's this guy, where's his Dan Lekapschus? What do you think? The whole world starts with you and ends with you. You're leaving early, you Balavera, right? And you come late, you Balavera. And because of him, Chazal instituted that there should be constant aliyahs, right? Because we don't want him to think that there's a bracha only before and not after, or there's a bracha after and not before. The Chassam Sofer explains it a little bit more. The Chassam Sofer explains that no, we're not afraid just that he's going to make this mistake. We want to care about the latecomer. So what we do is that we feel bad. He's going to have a laning that's not going to have a bracha on it. So Mamela, we have intervals of where we have a bracha at the end and then another bracha to start it up. Abavinishvi, Maisa, it's very important that you listen to the brachas, because you see the brachas are there for you. They're there for us to be yoyte the kriya. Now, the Maisa, the Etzim Zach, the Bracha Rishayna, the Bracha Achrayna, you should know there's a Be'er Sheva. He brings down that the Gemara in Saita Daf Mem Aleph is mashma, that Kishem Hashem Ekra is the makor of the Bracha. The Gemara says, how do we know you make a Bracha before you lay in? Kishem Hashem Ekra, Avogoy Lelekenu. So it sounds like it's deraisa. The Bar Sheva already wonders, how could it be? And the Mogen Avram Taka Paskins, it's only a Derabanan. Mogen Avram and Kuflan Atesi Face says, how could it be Derabanan? The whole entire Takon of Ezra is only Derabanan. But the Maisa, others say, no, maybe it's Deraisa, because Enechanami, to lane is only Derabanan. But once you're laning, so now Havu Goydel Elikenu, the Marsha says a Davar Nifla. The Marsha says, where do you see it in the Pasuk? Every letter, every ois in the Sefer Torah is the Shemus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem Yisparach. That way we've been learning for the last few weeks. Every word here is Shemus of Hashem Yisparach in the Torah Kedosha. So Kishem Hashem Ekra, when I lay out of the Torah, Havu Goydel Elokeinu, make a bracha. That's the bracha. The bracha Achrona is taka the end of the mitzvah. We always know at the end of the mitzvah you have to make a bracha. It's got a murdik azach. Why aren't you Yotzei with the Birchas HaTorah that you made before? So obviously now you understand, because this is a separate mitzvah. But the Maram Shik says, Davar Nifla, he says, K'may that we find that when it comes to an apple, if a person made a bracha on an apple, he's not really Yotzei on or afterward to eat an olive, because an olive is more chshivas. So he says the learning, the laning has maybe more of a chshivas. Laning itself maybe has possibly more chashivas. So therefore you need a new bracha. And the bracha from before doesn't work. So this Rabbi Yisai, you all know the bracha Rishayna, that's the Me'ulah Sheba brachas, that's Asher Bachar Banu, that's the Torah, Klal Yisrael, Kuchabricha, Raisa, it's all half the dika bracha. And the bracha Achrona is the Chai Olam, not the B'Sechenu, that the Torah explains here, Murdik Raid, that this is the Chai Olam. What's the Chai Olam? The Chai Olam is the Blat Gemara. The Chai Olam, that's our key and our ticket to Olam Abba. The Chai Olam, that's not the B'Seichenu. Who's by the Bima? We have 3 people by the Bima. Rabbi Yisai don't have tainus, says the Mishabura in Kuf Mem Aleph and Sivkot and Tezvav, Tezayin. He says, don't have tainus on the Gabai. You know, a lot of people have tainus on the Gaba. So there, it's like having tainus on the Kodesh Baruch Hu, says the Mishabura. Because we know that the Gaba, he's Keneged Hashem Yisparach, Kivyachal, he's the one that gives it. The oil of the Torah, he's connected Klal Yisrael. The Bal Koirei, he's connected to Moshe Rabbeinu. So you got to make sure the Gabbai is somebody that's right to be connected Hashem Yisparach. But you also can't have tainas on Hashem Yisparach. You can't have tainas on him. When you get the Aliyah, you go the shortest way, says the Trumas Hadeshin, in Beis Kuf Yates. And you go back to your seat, not the shortest way. In Kuf Mem Aleph, Steve Zayin, this is brought down because of the covenant of the Tzibur, the Tircha Tzibur, you go the fastest way. And also you go there, even if there's Aliyahs, even if there's Mishaberach, you still go the fastest way to show a Chavivus for the Torah Kedosha. And the Mogen Avram says, when you get the Aliyah, okay, actually, let's mention first something else. Everything, Rabbi said, there's nothing trivial over here. Right? How do we do it? How do we do it? How do we do the Aliyah LaTorah? There's a great Machlekes in the Gemara and Megillah. The Gemara and Megillah at the end of Daf Lamed Beis, do I keep the Sefer Torah open or do I close it? This is, an old fight. I mean, the truth is, I remember when I was a bar mitzvah, everybody kept it closed. Now I get older, I think everybody keeps it open. But I have to tell you what's going on here. It's a machlekes, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yisai, everything matters. Everything matters. What they consider, what they've called matters, doesn't matter. What we say matters is the Torah open, the Torah closed. Is this what Hashem Yisparach cares about? Yes. This is exactly what's important. This is the machlekes between the 2 greatest people that worked the face of planet Earth in the last 2,000 years, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir, the Tzadikei Yisodei Olam. And they had a machlekes to keep the Sefer Torah open when you make the bracha. Because why? Avad the Pashtas, you should keep it open. Bein Rabbi Yehuda, Bein Rabbi Meir agreed that Pashtas, you should keep it open. Just what's the problem? The problem is, how can we keep it open? Hooray, it looks like we're laning out of the Sefer Torah. But Rabbi Meir says, but how could you close it? If you're going to close it, Rabbi Yehuda says, how could you close it? If you're going to close it, it's going to be a hefsek. 1 second hefsek, Rabbi Yisai, of opening it up, 1 second. Right? But yes, everything matters. The covenant of the tzibur matters. So there's a tremendous machlekes. And Rabbi Yehuda says you keep it open. And we paskin the ma'isa like Rabbi Yehuda, that you keep it open and you make the bracha. That's how the Shulchan Aruch seems to paskin. But the problem is that if you're going to keep it open, so then what about the problem that it looks like we're making the bracha straight out? So in Shulchan Aruch in Kuf Lamed Tes Dalet, it says you make the brachas open You say you keep the Sefer Torah open and you make the brachas because we can't have a hefsek. And the Ramah brings a kolboi. He says keep it open and just face to the side. The Bir Halacha is not happy about this. He says, how could you turn your face away? It's improper. The Bach, the Taz say, how could you turn yourself away from the Torah? So the Chayei Adam comes up with an idea. He says, close your eyes. And the Mishnah Berurah seems to say so also. You should keep the Sefer Torah open and close your eyes. And then the Bir Halacha says you should know that some taka, they close the Sefer Torah and their minig has a basis. So if that's your minig, you can close the Sefer Torah, just immediately open it. So everybody say, a Torah Shlema, what to do? Okay, ask your father, whatever he does, that's what you do, right? It's interesting. The Maisa, that which the Bach and the Taz don't like, and the Ramah does, I think that's the meaning of most of the Litvish over here in Eretz Yisrael. They keep the Sefer Torah open and they turn to the side. But you should know that the Baal Koirei should be careful. Sometimes the Baal Koirei, he does two mistakes. He's looking for the place, and he's looking in there, and then afterward he says Amen, and it looks like he's saying Amen straight out of the Sefer Torah, says the Shar Ephraim. That's one issue. Second of all, he should say Amen miyad, because otherwise it's an Amen Yisaymer, Rabbi Yisai. Now, Lamaisa, kissing the Sefer Torah. How could you not kiss the Sefer Torah? Don't you kiss your tefillin? Don't you kiss your tzitzis? But kissing the letters of the Sefer Torah, even though there's a munkatra about this, but the Kloisenberger said, you're going to pass all the letters. So it's better, Rabbi Yisai, just kiss the Asei Chaim of the Sefer Torah. When you actually get the Aliyah, so the Mogen Avram brings down that you don't touch the cloth, but you should hold both Asei Chaim. So we would think, yeah, because I'm making a bracha on it. The Mogen Avram brings down, no, because this is mamish k'moi that it was given at Sinai. You're supposed to be showing that this is the way that I received it at Sinai. We're receiving the Torah at Sinai. We know that some people, they pick up the Sefer Torah here, there, everywhere. The Matei Moshe explains that k'moi, by Megillah, we say Igeres Azais, we pick up the Igeres, the Megillah. So too, when you say the word Torah, that's how you remember for the rest of your life. Pick it up a little bit. And then you say, Nasan lanu Toiras emes. You pick up a little bit to advise that this is the Torah Kedosha. The Maisa, do you bow down? Obviously, by Baruch Hu, you bow down. But the Mogen Avram quotes a minig. He quotes a minig. Pri Megadim brings it down that you're supposed to bow down even by the Baruch. It's interesting. I haven't seen this that much, but Mogen Avram quotes a minig. Baruch Hu, obviously, you go down, you go up by Hashem, and then he quotes another minig that when you say Baruch, you should also bow. This is a minig that I haven't seen so much. Mishnah Berurah, the Ramah brings down in Kuf Mem Aleph Siv Zayin that part of your job is to stay by the bima. Lo yered ad she'ol kfar roy likros achrav. And the Mishnah Berurah brings down that you should stay there until the end of the Aliyah. You should stay, in other words, you got Shlishi, of course. So after Shlishi, don't just leave when Revi comes. You should stay there throughout Revi. And this is the minig, and everything is quoted. This is brought down in the Mishnah Berurah. Brought down. What happens if you forgot to say Baruch Hu? It's interesting. Sometimes I saw this. I saw it one time. He forgot to say Baruch Hu, and he went right to the bracha. So the Olam started to, no. So he thought they were helping him on. And so he went even faster. And then he finished the bracha. So the Kai Gavna, it's okay. Because once he lost the Baruch Hu, the purpose of the Baruch Hu was to be ma'agas together. But once he made a bracha, now you have to go and lane, and you can't start again. If he would have said Baruch Atah Hashem, should he say Lamdeini Chukecha? That's a big shaila. That's a very big shaila, because over here, there's a famous Mogen Avram about if he came to shul, he was Yisrael. He came to get his aliyah, he was Yisrael, and there was no kohen, and he said Baruch Atah Hashem. So, but there's a very big shaila. Because there, do you say Lamdeini Chukecha? So there we say Lamdeini Chukecha, says the Mogen Avram, is not the most Gavaldik Eitz. And once he already said Baruch Atah Hashem, there it could be that we let him finish. So it should be the same thing over here also. Once he said Baruch Atah Hashem, because he forgot Baruch Hu, so perhaps it's not such a good Eitz, and we should let him finish. But there's a difference, says the Ber Moshe. The Ber Moshe is a very interesting chap. He said there, why should he suffer? He said Baruch Atah Hashem. Why should he have a b'diavad eitz of saying Lamdeinu Chukecha, which is a b'diavad eitz? Here, he messed up for us. He's our shliach, and he messed up, says the Debratina Rav. Because we sent him up to get an aliyah, and he messed up. He's not giving us our baruch. So maybe over here we tell him too bad, and you have to say Lamdeinu Chukecha and say baruch. I saw that Tzitz Eliezer doesn't agree with this, but that's a very interesting shaila. That's a very interesting shaila. The Maisa, you have to stand during the Aliyah L'Torah. It's a reenactment of Sinai, and you, the Oila, you're connected Klal Yisrael, so you certainly have to stand, and you're not supposed to lean. It's disrespectful, like we find in Shulchan Aruch and Shemona Esrei by Tzadi Dalet Ches, that a person shouldn't lean even slightly. It's not their cheretz. The Shbur says, anyways, you're not really supposed to lean on the bima. And the Kuf Mem Aleph, it's brought down over here that if a person, Vada Shulchan Aruch that Tzarech Likrois Kuf Mem Aleph Aleph Tzarech Likrois Ma'umad. I feel this on the Kreis that's Aser Elim Kain. He's mamish very difficult for him. Let's say he's not a well person. Because of that, he has to lean, right? We spoke many times already about not refusing an aliyah. If it'll be pagay in somebody else, about Yartzeit or his father, keep it of aim or something like that. So then Avada, the right thing to do is to taka refuse the aliyah, and Adrabah, that'll be arichas yamin for him. Look, Ira. Excuse me. Can you give an aliyah? Let's end with one shaila. Can we give an aliyah to somebody who he's not being yaitse now with the laning? He was yaitse already with the laning, or he Stamachash of a guy, they want to give him an aliyah, but he's not being yaitse now with the laning. He's laning later. So the fear what we see over here, the preacher, the Magen Avram, they bring this down in Reish Pei Beis. They seem to say it's no problem because the tzibur has the chiyuv of the brachas, and he's being moitzi us in our chiyuv. And Chanami, if he already was yaitse, we won't be able to add him as one of the people which is creating the chiyuv. But once there is a chiyuv, we're allowed to send him up, and he's allowed to be our shliach. And the Mamshik says that this is what he used to do himself. He used to do this l'chatchila. This himself he used to do l'chatchila. So this Rabbi says Adkan Hilchos Kriyas HaTorah. It's Kanai Nahara, what we learned Kanai Nahara. What about Parashat Zachar? I'm not sure what the question is. Unfortunately, tonight I have to leave early because I'm giving another shiur now somewhere.
Okay, just one question quite around. Yeah. I'll edit the questions here. Why taka, according to those shitas, are we not required to make sure that every Ayla knows? And what does he have to know? He has to know how to learn Trop. What does he have to know?
He doesn't have to learn Trop. He doesn't have to know the Trop. He just has to be able to read it. Mila b'mila.
He has to be able to read Lashon Kodesh. I mean, does he have to?
Yeah.
So do you have to get the pronunciation right? Otherwise, you can't get an aliyah.
It'll totally in that other shiur. It'll be totally in. It's got to be a pronunciation that'll ruin the. But Derek Cloud, if he's doing it together with the Balkaira, it should be okay. It's got to be a zad terrible pronunciation that he's going to mamish batch up the words and say mamish different words the gamre, which would be ma'akiv.
Okay, one last question. The minig is to make sure that you yaitze the brachas and Parshas Zachar, and we call that out. Why don't we call that out every week? Good shaila.
Why don't we call it out every week? I guess because we're chayshish, that I actually might be able to give you a more intelligent answer if you wait one moment. I saw that a few years ago I wrote something about this. One moment. Let's see if I can give you a more intelligent answer. I mean, Pasha this because Zachar is deraisa, but I think I saw more than that. Here, the Chassam Sofer, they bring down
the second day of Rosh Hashanah is only Drabanan, right?
Yeah. No, got the name Morenu, but Chassam Sofer, Shamar Koidim Abrachas, Yikavin Kol Echad Lotzeis B'Berchasai. But I did see that the Stipler, they bring down Amarti L'Mariv Rebbe, Shirav Echad Shlita was machras in his shul that everybody should be yotzei the brachas. Amar L'Mariv Rebbe.
Every week?
Sorry? No. Even in Zachar. Amarti L'Mariv Rebbe, Shesvarasai, Me'achad Shetzrichim Lotzeis B'Sefer Torah, and came Mistaber Gam B'Brachas, because they're shaykh to the Kriya. I am prima gadam. I said, L'Mariv Rebbe, Zedav Chadash, Le'nagu came Me'olam. And then he writes, Ubechlal harav now, that Rav, he's mechadish too many things. And my Rebbe wasn't noyig like this. And in the minion by the Stipler, about Koirei Machar is only be yoytze in Parsha Zachar Deraisa. Okay? That's what they do. So I don't know. In my shul, I machar it with the brachas because I come from the Hungarians and we do like some cipher. So we're machars. Yes, they have kavanah in the brachas. And you know what? But the more that you can have kavanah, the better. The more kavanah. And if they'll have kavanah in the brachas, maybe Gulai will have kavanahs in the Zachar. Yeah.
I'm sure, but maybe the Hungarians.
I was just reading from the Orchis Rabbeinu. Where was that Orchis Rabbeinu? Chelik Gimel in the 32nd page. But God has what's going to be with Haftarah and Maftir?
I don't know. This is a good shaila. We'll have
big taina because it says on the Yarchei Kala program it said Haftarah. So my son asked me, "What's with Haftarah?"
Good kasha, chayv kadosh. That bli neder we have to be mashal this chayv. I just want to say all this stuff Hungarian is all very nice, but growing up in a Hungarian, the Galiciana shul, there was no banging of anything about brachas. This is all the schlussed of Torah in the last 20 years. That's where all these things came from. So
when I told you I have to go early, it's because I have to prepare. I have 17 zachars to get to on Shabbos. I don't mean shalom zachars. So I'm have to prepare already now.
You're up to 17. Why? That's all? Just 17, right?
I'm getting older.
As sort of David Soloveitchik. No, dry as Kanuk. Yeah. Okay, Rabbi say, thank you, Rav. Unfortunately, we'll have a weekly hiatus before we see him next